Welcome to the Celebrate Moral Exemplars Podcast with Dan Osborne. We think of moral exemplars as ordinary people who have the moral will to do the right thing to improve the lives of others. They often do this by using their creativity, wisdom, and judgment to challenge rules and accepted practices. Each episode will provide you with insights into the motivations, sacrifices, and rewards that these amazing people experience. We also hope to plant a seed in your own mind and heart to perhaps consider one day, and in your own way, following the path of these moral exemplars. Now, here's Dan Osborne.
Welcome to the podcast. In my experience, it's not uncommon to meet someone who talks about some enormous dream or goal. I'm talking now about the kind of things that could take a decade or more to achieve. What is very uncommon is when someone not only remains committed to their dream over the long haul, but also, in fact, achieves it. And today's guest is just such a person. I first met her in 1991, where we were both attending a business course together, and it was there that she told me about her dream to provide a safe, healthy home for homeless and neglected teenagers. Today, we're going to learn how she turned that dream into the Lighthouse Foundation. And for over 25 years, the Lighthouse Foundation has supported over 800 young people to break the cycle of homelessness, move into employment and educational opportunities, and to overcome damaging life experiences. It's my pleasure to welcome to the podcast the founder of the Lighthouse Foundation, Susan Barton. Welcome, Susan.
Hi, Dan. Lovely to be here, and hello, listeners.
I'm excited about sharing your story with our listeners because I think it's a fairly unique one. As I mentioned, perhaps we could just sort of jump into it. And I was very curious to learn about how you actually got the idea. What was the story involved with how you arrived at the idea to start the Lighthouse Foundation?
Yeah. Well, it was over 30 years ago, and I had the opportunity to work in an orphanage in Sri Lanka, and I was a naive girl from the suburbs, only went to year 10, and I just thought everyone in the world looked after babies. I mean, they were sacrosanct, and that just was a generalised principle. And what I saw there was children dying of malnutrition, and I was just shocked beyond belief. And I worked in an orphanage there and was asked to take a little baby to the infectious diseases hospital, which is where I saw the most tragic babies dying really from lack of food. And I came face to face with my own ability to help and realised that although I came from a first world country and I had all these opportunities, I couldn't just pick up this baby that was in front of me and take it to get a visa and bring it back with me and join my family. I mean, I had everything that child needed. And I found out that baby passed away. And today, even now, it just breaks my heart that I could have picked that baby up and it would be alive, and I couldn't do that. And what was stopping, I was trying to process what stops that happening. And I came back to Australia a really different girl, one that I knew, even though I still wanted to look after my own children and provide for them and have a nice car that worked, etc., I knew that something had dramatically changed in me, and I knew that I couldn't live in a world where I knew things like what I'd witnessed were happening without doing something. And that if it was my child, and in some way that was my child that I left behind, what wouldn't I do? And I'm really territorial. I mean, you don't come near my kids and the claws come out, and I'm very territorial about them. And I think every child needs that sense of a parent. That's why you've got parents, to love them and support them and put boundaries around them and do all those things. And in fact, we're all parents of those young children that don't have families like we do. And so I guess, I started thinking, well, what can I do back in Australia? And when I did some research, I realised we didn't have children dying of malnutrition, but what we had was children dying from lack of love. And we were putting them in institutions and putting a roof over their head, But I think all of us know that a roof's not enough, that children need a sense of attachment and belonging and need connection in the community for them to survive and thrive. And so I started fostering in my own home and got to the point with my own children. I had so many, I had no more beds left. And so I was kind of putting them on couches and all sorts of things like that. And I had an opportunity to do a course called Money and You. And I was challenged there about what I was doing and said, well, you can do that for so many, but what about the rest of Australia? And so I realised that in some way I was creating my own little orphanage and thought I was going to save every child in Australia, and came to the realisation that that was impossible and I would get sick. So a group of business people, including yourself, Dan, surrounded me and said, well, what can we do to help? And you need to learn some principles. You need to know about policies and procedures, and you need to know about McDonald's and how you can do more of what you're doing, so duplicating the process. And I remember, I think I cried all afternoon and I said, don't you realise I'm stupid? I went to year 10. How do I know any of those things? Right. And they said, actually, you don't have to know, need to know what you do well, and we need to document that, and then we need to, as I said, duplicate it.
Okay. So what you're saying there is that in order for you, when you started the idea that when you realized you couldn't save the amount of kids that you wanted with your own home, you needed to create some sort of organization, and then some people came into your life, and then they started to show you the process. And what was that when you first started to learn about the process of being able to create the dream that you wanted? What was that like? I mean, that learning process early on.
Yeah, it was highly challenging, but I felt like I'd come home in a way, because I felt like I was surrounded by people that I just knew from some innate. So I think I had a germination of being entrepreneurial, but I didn't know that word then. And I loved the people that surround me, and I felt really connected. Oh, right, okay, teach me, and I want to learn. And so again, I never did it on my own. It was with a group of people, but I was certainly saturated by information that it was like exquisite to me, and I felt like I was going to the school of entrepreneurs rather than the school where I was always told I was an idiot and dumb and all those sorts of things. And I found the school that was right for me. Okay.
So in those early days, and when you were first starting it, so the dominant sort of feeling or mood for you was, it sounds like excitement and like of learning and that sort of thing. Is that, when absolutely. You think back on it, was that the sort of the feeling that you sort of experienced mostly at those early days of the formation?
Yeah, I just soaked up all the information, all that personal development, and looking at what I was good at and not so good at, and then forming, teams to work on that so we could do it together. But I think the dominant feeling behind that was a real sense of responsibility that if I didn't learn this, the kids were going to die. And to this day, every child that walks in the door, I don't want to lose them. I want to bring them all along in a civil community. I want us all to get along and all to have the same rights and the same love and attention. And if these kids didn't land in the perfect family or the good enough family, then let us as human beings and a civil society provide that for them. And I didn't see that being done. I think, what I saw them as, looking at them going into a system that wasn't there for them. It was for the system to survive, but not about the individuals, and creating something around them that supported them being nurtured and nourished and loved and protected and cared for, and transitioning into adulthood. So instead we have a system where it's pretty broken, and I think probably 8 years ago, it was 35% of kids that go into resi care end up falling out and going on to juvenile justice and jails, and costing us an enormous amount of money if we were running, looking at just the costs of it. But for me, it's more about as human beings and as a civil society, what cost is that to our psyche when we discard our most vulnerable? It reduces me to tears. And I see the outcomes of that because I see the kids that come in here that have gone through 20 and 30 homes in the sector because people can't cope with them because their behaviours are such that... And their behaviours are such because they're trying to survive, and so they're acting out to try and tell us they're not coping and things aren't working. And what we do is just move them on to one resi care to the next to foster care and so on.
Right.
And so they get more and more damage. I call it the system then damages them.
Right.
And then by the time they get to Lighthouse, we've got this young person that most people would say is beyond taken care of or beyond redemption. And that's not what I believe. I believe if young people, and I wish we got them really early, but we don't. We get them when they've been so damaged that it takes a lot longer to repair that damage and hopefully be able to help work on with them enough and heal enough so that they can have a worthwhile life, that's not filled with them harming themselves or, wanting to suicide or not being able to fit in with the community and going out and causing damage because they feel that that's all, they can amount to.
Yeah. I remembered actually when you referred a moment ago to your own home when you had you started off having the kids there. And I think I remember visiting you one time there. And I couldn't believe the amount of activity and what was going on there. And I was thinking, my goodness, how could anyone ever get any kind of rest in a house like this? Because it was so active, but it was also full of a lot of love and a lot of sharing. And that was the beginning. I remember that. Also, another question I wanted to ask you when you first early on started off, the people who were closest to you, your family and such, how did they align with your immense, kind of this immersive change that you took on? How did that, obviously it affected the people that were closest in your life, and how did they respond to this major change in your sort of needs?
It had some profound consequences, both good and bad. And I think that there was something innate in me that couldn't let go and say, oh, well, that's going to probably have consequences. I was so passionate at the time about not repeating what I did and walk away from the children in Sri Lanka. And somehow in my body, they became my children. And I think if we look at transference, I look at that my father left me when I was a little child and never came back for me. And I was saying, well, you don't do that to a child. You look after them and you make sure you're there for their life. And I always had that sense of loss that I didn't have a father, and, things were really tough for me growing up. And I think that was my child or my children, and I was kind of saying, well, this is how you take care of a child. They're precious and you don't get a second chance at this, and you look after them because you're their parent. And so I was almost compulsed to do it.
So the people that were around you at the time, some aligned with it and supported, and others were not as
my children loved it because it was extra kids in the family, and they
had a whole new
got
social
to
network.
Experience, and some of that was good and some not, and it had very different effects on my children.
Right.
I hope during the time that I'm very open to talking about that with all my kids, and that there's been more good in that than, negative for them. And I think that's the conversation that you might have to have with them. But it did affect my personal life, and I separated from my partner at the time. But that wasn't all that, because of me or the young people. It was other things as well. But then I had a very stable relationship of a partner that really supported what I did, and so we became carers for 12 years in the home, and the rest is history.
So you've had so many big wins over the years. So this is maybe a bit difficult to answer, just to try to remember. But do you remember the first big win that sort of made you think, I think this idea is actually going to work?
Well, I think, first of all, it was the group from Money and You surrounding me and kind of saying, well, come on, dream big and think about everything you want, and we'll work towards that. So it was kind of tutoring me in doing a mind map, really, and looking at, if I look at my mind map now, I say, oh my heavens above, that came true. To the point I was even scared of dreaming, because I thought, oh, well, I mightn't want the white Mercedes. That might just be for me, and I don't really need that. And let's really focus on what I want. So I really believe in doing mind maps and putting everything you want in it. I think the biggest win was really realising it was about relationships and being, I'm a really loyal person, and when someone supports me, I'm loyal for life and I'll do anything. And one of the people that came into my life then was Vicky Vida, and she's never left my side in, over 30 years. And because of her, many of the programs are going, particularly we really wanted to look at the work we were doing around therapeutic care and attachment, which was such an innovative practice compared to what's being offered. And Vicky and I said, well, it works so well with the most pointy and difficult teenagers. Why wouldn't it work with the younger young people? And why wouldn't it work with mums and babies who've been in violent family situations, where we can retrain that parent not to abuse their child, but to learn attachment processes that this child will have a better life and not go down the welfare trajectory. So Vicky has piloted and supported financially 2 of those programs at a really considerable amount. And I must say the Smorgon family have been extraordinary in enabling and allowing a small organisation to not only flourish, but to look at what's best practice and to advocate for change in the way we care for young people in out-of-home care. Okay. But not just out-of-home care, it's in care. The people we put in care, we end up systematically abuse them in most cases, rather than putting money around them in the first part to then not have them go into juvie justice and jail and save millions down the track. We have this really short-term approach, rather than this, let's put, early intervention practice where we put a lot in the front end, put in 2 good years of best practice so that then they can transition back into the community. And what we've seen is add their own value. So now we've got young people who are social workers and astrophysicists and work with the United Nations, and educational psychologists and office workers and truck drivers and all sorts of things. But they've gone on and now they're contributing themselves to their community. And we have young people that come back as carers in the homes, which is, to me, thrilling, because here they are coming back and then they want to give back in. And a lot of them are becoming social workers and youth workers and psychologists because of the therapeutic nature and the healing work they did here. Okay. They understand the absolute need for that to heal the trauma, because it's all very well putting a roof over their head like Maslow's hierarchy, but unless the young people given more than that and heal the pain, they'll just go from one broken relationship and one home to the next, and then, as I said, end up in really poor circumstances and bad outcomes, rather than let's think long term and resource these young people and give them what's needed and wanted so that they can move through that.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I'm sure there's a lot of kids you remember fondly, as you just mentioned. Can you remember one particular kid early on whose experience with Lighthouse sort of helped you draw strength during difficult times, perhaps? Just one particular?
Yeah, well, my very first 2 young people, I probably shouldn't mention their names, but both of them have gone on to be millionaires, funnily enough. And here's one young person, the first young person, he came from a family where he had about 13 or 14 siblings, and he didn't remember one of them because each one of them farmed out to different people or foster care or a Lambie at the time.
Right.
And that's where I first met him, at a Lambie. And
what's a Lambie?
It was an orphanage in Box Hill that's since closed. And he was just broken. And so we started the process. And he's like my son now. And he lives interstate, but twice a year he comes down. And, you know, I call his grown-up children my children. They call me Nan. And I was talking to their mum a couple of weeks ago that they've separated, but he's since gone on to another partner, but really successfully. And they're all very happy and together. And you know, it's just, for me, they're the gifts, you know, the rewards are seeing the young people growing up and changing their circumstances so they're looking after their children and they're not in homes anymore and they've been able to form really strong relationships with their partners. They're not breaking down and they've been, each of them, in strong relationships for 20 years and having a bank account that's pretty substantial like that. And another one works overseas in the rag trade and, you know, kind of he's probably in 15 countries every year. And he caught up with my daughter while she was volunteering overseas and they formed their own adult relationship. And, you know, so those things are just so undescribable, really. They're just my packets of gold.
You're listening to the Celebrate Moral Exemplars podcast. Each episode gives you a rare opportunity to look inside the hearts and minds of people who are committed to improving the lives of others. Our intention is to plant a seed in your mind, a seed that may grow one day and cause you to want to emulate, in your own way, the path taken by these moral exemplars. Contact information regarding this episode's guest can be found on our website at www.celebratemoralexemplars.com. And now, back to the interview.
It's great to hear about those wins and the kids who benefited, you know, so much. But I'm sure there must have been plenty of struggles and hardships. What stands out as one of the hardest periods that you went through with the Lighthouse Foundation?
Oh, I think if I look at just some of the kids that have had such tragedies, you know, we've had one child that witnessed the murder and decapitation of their parent by another parent, and to hear those stories and to think, you know, the tragedy that they're going to grow up with and they're just babes, you know, and how do you put back enough inside them to be able to have the resilience to heal from that? And, you know, you think about the father that threw his little child off Westgate Bridge, you know, she was 4, I think, at the time, you know, those sorts of things. And they're the kind of kids that walk through this door that have survived those sorts of extreme traumas. And we think we're going to fix it by putting a roof over their head, you know, and not putting in the sorts of things like the psychology and a warm, loving, caring home and the time, giving them the time to unpack that and learn to grow, and the time to go to school and finish it without worrying about where they're going to be living. So if they kind of think, oh, I've got to move again in 3 weeks, you can't think of school and getting through and having a good education, all those sorts of things. So we need to actually say, you know, enough's enough. Let's stop this madness and let's just look at each child as an individual and put around everything we can and not be driven by a fiscal outcome, but actually a social capital outcome where we care about as we would our own child. I bet you don't think about, oh, I'm not going to send my kid to school because that's going to be, you're going to go, where's the best school for my child that's going to give that child everything they need with the passions that they've got. So it's kind of like thinking of each child in that form, for me, is what's needed for each of these young people.
Right. As you started to learn and observe about the application of the more conventional approaches to helping troubled teenagers, what was your opinion about the current practices and theories that were out there? What did you find?
I'm always frustrated because I'm pretty entrepreneurial, and I think if we find out what young people are passionate about, then they can actually drive the healing process. But what I find is we keep throwing good money after bad. But, I look at employment programs and we've got kids here that have been in them 4 and 5 years. How is that working? And they've never had a job. Someone's getting money to provide these, but we don't have outcomes. And so, I want to see outcomes as the driver for funding. And we show outcomes, but we don't get any funding because they don't fit silos. So we're very siloed in our approach to funding. We're not very outcomes focused, So I would think
you'd like to see more emphasis on the outcomes.
Yeah, and I think I look at young people who the funding stops at 18 and sometimes before then. And when you see a young people who might be 18, but their emotional ability or intelligence has been stunted at when they were 12 or 13 or even younger, at 18, we need to be taking them right through till they're 21. So we've got that 2 or 3 years so that we don't just discard them on the streets and just let them run amok. That that's the most horrific, not horrific, but challenging age, because teenagers are meant to, by their very nature, meant to challenging the status quo. So why would you put them on the streets on their own to do that? You want them surrounded by mature, supportive carers and people that are trained to work with them in a certain way to work through that. So, I think that our government thinking, they need support to be able to pilot more entrepreneurial programs that have got evidence-based best practice behind them. And I'd like to see them give opportunities to organisations like Lighthouse to ourselves thrive without worrying about where the funding comes from, because we get no recurrent funding. And yet we've had over 800 young people go through our program and become our alumni. And I think we've had like an 87% impact or success rate. I don't like the word success because how do you measure success? But, and we've had our program looked at independently outside, and we've had such magnificent reports back, like every dollar.
Just maybe tell me a little bit about that program that you referred to there. This is a program that you've developed, like an approach to the...
Yeah, a therapeutic attachment approach to Lighthouse. So we can talk about therapeutic, and you can say, oh, yes, we're therapeutic, but we are actually really therapeutic in our approach. So it's not just, and therapeutic means unpacking that trauma, but also we work with attachment. So the young people live in our homes. They're surrounded by a community of homes and carers and people. So they thrive in a community as well. But they also have psychologists that work with them 24/7. So often we say it's therapeutic, but that might mean seeing a psychologist once a month. But really, therapeutic is really surrounding that young person and seeing them as much as they need to work through that trauma when they need it, and not be asked to wait because either there's no money there or there's a whole waiting list of people, and it's a bit, the system's broken. It's a bit like the hospital system. In the public system, you might have to wait 3 years for an operation. The same is in the care sector, and young people often have to wait.
So you guys have developed, I understand, these different, you've had your learnings from the years, and you've put them in, you've formalized them in a model, and then you've made that model now available to others through the Lighthouse Institute.
Yes, so we've got a Lighthouse Institute where we do training and consultancy on trauma-informed practice and attachment. And so
is that available to almost any organization in the world?
Yeah, absolutely available to all organisations throughout the world. And we just did over thousands of trainings with the response to sexual abuse. So we were one of the key organisations imparting that training. We've done it with some of the big key organisations in the sector, like Sacred Heart Mission. So we've been training in in trauma-informed practice. And usually when they come and see what we're doing, they say, oh, we thought we were doing trauma-informed practice, but now I really see what trauma-informed practice is.
Wow.
And then they realise that it has to be resourced fully up front. You can't just, say you're doing it and then do 1 or 2 sessions and think that's going to be it. You have to be committed to the whole process. For it to be, it has to transpire right through your organisation.
Okay.
But organisations can come and take bits of it from us, the bits they like, or, add bolt-on bits and then come back for other bits so that they can do it each module at a time.
Okay.
Yeah, but we have 2 highly trained psychologists, doctors in their field that go out and do the training.
I see. Just want to kind of wind up a bit. What's the best way for people to support the Lighthouse Foundation?
The best way for people to support the organisation is to come in and talk to us and find out what we do, to understand that we get no recurrent funding, so that the people that come and support us really become the parents of the organisation. So I think it's fabulous, because usually you can't come in and work with young people in the sector because of OH and risk and everything, whereas Lighthouse is saying young people can only heal if they're brought back into the community. We would love corporates that think that they would like to make a difference to the lives of young people. Can certainly, that's what we need most of, corporates to come in, be corporate parents, and see how we align and how they can support. Because what I'd like to see, that every child in the community had an opportunity to have an experience that is loving and caring, and a sense that they belong in the community, so they aren't abused by the system. And if we had the resources and the money, we could open up more homes for these young people. We could do more trainings in what we do, and really transform the way we respond to these young people, and come from a model of social capital rather than fiscal impunity or short-sightedness.
Right.
So, I'd love the support of, because I believe everyone has a unique gift to give to these young people.
I was going to ask you, what's the one thing that you found that most people don't know about helping and contributing to other people's lives?
These young people's behaviours are quite challenging, and it's not an easy fix, and that you can be led to believe that you can be a great person and come and be a foster carer, and you may not realise that it's a long haul, and that young people will naturally, for the first 3 months it'll be the honeymoon period, and you go, oh, this is easy, I can do this. But when they feel relaxed and trusting, that's when the behaviours come out that are hiding below, that have kept them alive and surviving, and they're the pushing back and making you reject them because that's what they're used to, and it helps them feel rejected because that's what they're used to, and it's having the ability and the resilience to hang in over the long term. And I always talk about 2 years for them to have the time for you to do the work with them, and that's to be there even when they've threatened you, or be there when they're angry, or be there when they've cut their wrists, or to show them that you are reliable and trustworthy even when they push you away and their behaviours are really off the charts, to be able to then relax and let you in, and to let them start attaching to, which is the scary bit, because that's where they've been let down, because they've attached and they've been rejected or given up for fostering or adoption. And to have to repeat that, it's a bit like, if you've had a divorce and then you're saying to your husband and wife, oh, now I'm going to trust you even though you've, left me, and now I'm going to be vulnerable and give you another, and these are kids without those higher functioning things to go, I'm going to let you in and you're another adult and you're likely to hurt me. So they're what we don't tell the ordinary person that I had to learn on the job.
Right.
When young people were pushing back or they were angry or, they had a milk crate in front of me and said, I'm going to fucking kill you, to kind of go the distance with that and not think, oh, God, what about my kids? What about me? And, this is scary. So it's kind of learning those things and knowing those things. And for me, it's about, that's why organisation like Lighthouse is so important, because we can do that intermediary work before young people then go into a family and are fostered, that we can do all that harder work up front if we're resourced to do that. So I would love us to be a partner with government in their new pilots and projects to look at doing that kind of intervention work that is really quite full on and time consuming, and it's costly, but it's not more cost than what's already put in anyway with poorer outcomes.
Right. Great. That's fantastic. Susan, I just want to thank you so much for sharing your story today. It's been wonderful hearing, about the journey that you've been through. And I think a lot of our listeners are going to be able to benefit from a lot of the insights that you shared with them. And I look forward to speaking with you again and watching the growth of Lighthouse in the future.
Thank you, Dan. It's been lovely, very emotional. And I'd love to come back again sometime and talk to the listeners. And I guess there too for listeners, I think what Lighthouse has got a lot of experience in now is for families who have got their own challenges and trauma and young people. It's a really difficult time to live with teenagers now, and we find a much higher suicide rate in schools with pressure. We find kids, using drugs. So what we're wanting now is to create a clinic where we can now reach out to the outside world and start working with families that have got challenges and be able to provide them opportunities through our learnings to develop a clinic at Lighthouse. So we would love anyone interested in supporting us with that. We're great. Also looking for land to develop with another company who will provide properties on blocks of land for us. Coburg have done that, the council there. They gave us a block of land, and Piff and Henley put a home on there, so now we've got a mums and program there. Okay. So if anyone's listening out there, or anyone that has got a property or investment homes and they'd like to provide an opportunity for Lighthouse to put our young people in those homes, we've got a real focus to have the most beautiful homes that we put our young people in. So in giving Lighthouse a loan, they won't have big holes in the wall and wrecked homes. We actually take care of them and leave them better than we had them. And we love to have long-term partnerships with people where they get to know us and we get to know them, and we work out win-wins and promote them and promote our program and do it together. So it's just a myriad of ways that people can become involved. Yeah. We can only survive through the generosity of our community, and we believe it's the way forward is that we don't want to create refuges and institutions. We actually want to relieve the government of this work, and we want to say, look, this is a community, a bit like Clean Up Australia. This is a community challenge, and as a community we need to respond and respond in the best way possible, because these are our kids and we need to take care of them. We need to feel good about and stand up and show the rest of the world that we can actually end homelessness, but it needs to be together.
No, it's beautiful. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to the Celebrate Moral Exemplars podcast with Dan Osborne. If you have any comments, questions, or suggestions, he would love to hear from you. Also, Dan is currently seeking moral exemplars to interview for future podcast episodes. So if you know such a person and would like to see their work acknowledged and promoted, please contact him via the website at www.celebratemoralexemplars.com. Thanks again for listening, and we look forward to connecting with you in the future.